Hello everyone and welcome back to Pyanodons Mods. This is Otaku Showboat and today we will be discussing Circuit 3s. Oh boy, it's it's that time now. Thus far we have gotten through Purple Science and now we are ready to begin our Circuit 3 chain. Oh boy. Oh boy. Don't forget, if you've been enjoying this tutorial series thus far, to please comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to help make this series appear higher up in search results. You can do all of the social stuff through the links in the description below this video. Pyanodons mods are in a constant state of flux, and therefore changes will likely happen at some point in the very near future after discussing these chains. You can support Pyanodon at patreon.com/Pyanodon, as well as myself at patreon.com/OtakuShowboat. So, without further ado, let's get started. This will at first appear like a bit of a cluster. I'll leave it at that, like a bit of a cluster. I've done this way under the assumption that you are going to be doing a bot-based base by this point anyway. So, realistically speaking, you're gonna look somewhat like this anyway, just with all the, like, robots flying around, with all the requester chests, and having random pipes coming in, all of that good stuff. So, we've also built to Mark II where appropriate, and also note that most every step in here can use productivity modules, and should use productivity modules. And as another side note, once you have circuit 3s, you can now start making level 2 modules. Not level 3s, because they have been changed recently to now require circuit 3s and 4s instead of circuit 2s and 3s with the previous level modules. So they are a bit more expensive for those level 3 modules, but we'll at least be able to make the level 2s going forward once we do have some non-zero circuit 3s. And as you may expect, the first productivity modules of level 2 that you produce should go in your chain for making more circuit 3s. That will help out quite a bit. So what do circuit 3s need? Well, we have this great big list here of things that circuit 3s need. But we already have a few of these. We already have optical fiber from circuit 2s. We already have microchips from circuit 2s. We have circuit 2s. We very likely already have solder at this point. My suggestion, of course, is to do the silver and tar-based solder, which gives an enormous output compared to the other recipes for solder. And because we hit Purple Science, we now have the ability to just get gold from our chromium processing. So by this point, you will have needed to set up your blue science processing of chromium, and then at Purple Science, once you pick up the gold processing tech at Purple Science, split off your chromite mix, I think that's what it's called, or solution, and then switch that over to producing gold. There is a split off of the chromium chain for that, and you can refer to the chromium processing video for all of the details for setting up your gold processing chain. Alternatively, you can particle accelerate for gold plates out of silver, and silver out of copper. So you can basically make copper into gold by doing that at the expense of some energy, lots of power, as well as some proton donors. So you will be spending boron for that. But since you're at Purple Science, you now also have the ability to particle accelerate for boron, which is quite relevant going forward here. Note that you could have started making Circuit 3s prior to getting Purple Science if, and only if, you have done particle acceleration for your gold, because you can do that at Blue Science, but I would not recommend doing it just due to the power and output speed of your particle accelerators to make a sufficient amount of gold to feed into this chain. I would say that the intention would be for you to do your Circuit 3s after setting up your Purple Science, but it is ultimately up to you if you want to skip ahead briefly. However, even if you get your Circuit 3s, you're not going to really be able to make anything of any particular value at Blue Science, except there is one key exception, and that is you will be able to make your Turbine Mark III, your Combustion Turbine Mark III, as soon as you get special small parts in Circuit Board 3s. So if you've followed the tutorials thus far, and you have chosen to do your Circuit Board 3s prior to doing the Purple Science, if you have set up the special small parts, and you have Circuit Board 3s, well, you've got Combustion Turbine Mark 3s, and that's, like, the only of the Mark 3 things that you will need, that you will be able to make early before Purple Science because of that. So, yeah, that's, like, the only thing that you could theoretically really make. I don't even know when the Combustion Turbine Mark III unlocks. It's here. It's blue. So yeah, you would be able to make it at Blue Science, technically, but I digress. So what is new here? What is, like, strictly new here? Well, we've got processors, we've got resistor 3s, we've got capacitor 3s, SMD diodes, inductor 3s, and mounted circuit substrate. Now, we're going to go through each of these, but first I want to briefly discuss a few of the, at least, like, two of the incredibly common components that will be used throughout this. Epoxy is first. Epoxy gets used in several of these steps. Epoxy I have mentioned before. Because I have mentioned resorcinol before. The resorcinol was used in aerogel. So note that in the aerogel chain, which you will need at some point, if you have not already set up your special small parts, you will need aerogel when you set up your special small parts, going into Mark III stuff. So you will need resorcinol anyway. Therefore, I suggest using some resorcinol to make epoxy. It is a lot of collagen. I hate spending collagen when there are alternative recipes. There is an alternative recipe for epoxy that does not use collagen. And we haven't really discussed how to get collagen. It's a simple-ish chain. I will probably do a tutorial talking about collagen, make a video specifically about collagen. If you've watched my stream series, you know my thoughts on collagen by now. It is abysmally slow, and therefore a, like, massive amount of space in your base is going to be dedicated to producing collagen. But there is an alternative that uses bisphenol A. Now, bisphenol A is only used in epoxy, and it is phenol and acetone. I think I would hope that this would be at ratio, because you can make phenol with acetone out of cumene. That would spend phosphoric acid, though. So really, I would do the recipe that gives you just phenol, do the phthalate-based acetone, and yeah, just get some hydrogen chloride, and that would give you this recipe for epoxy with sodium hydroxide. Both recipes, however, note that this recipe is very slow. It's very slow. You get 4 epoxy every 15 on a Mark 1, every 7.5 on a Mark 2. That is, by comparison, to the more expensive overall, I think, recipe, at least in terms of the actual resources it uses, are more expensive to get. This one gives you 6 every 1.5, or 4 per second on a Mark II level here. So just, yeah, you can clearly see that this would be a bigger setup to achieve the same results as this. Both will require ECH. ECH is oleochemicals, glycerol, and hydrogen chloride. Glycerol is primarily from the oleochemicals recipe. So the oleochemicals recipe gives you some glycerol, but you need more glycerol than the oleochemicals consumed in ECH in this recipe. So you will need additional glycerol, and I don't think you have the glycerol Tholen recipe yet. I think that's actually locked behind utility science, unfortunately. So I know there are a few rather useful recipes that get unlocked, rather useful Tholen recipes that are unlocked at utility science. But if you're going to be spending collagen anyway on the epoxy, well, yeah, if you're spending it anyway, may as well just do that too. And the reason for that is, as you can see, this is 2 and 6 to make 6, 33. You're going to need a lot of mixers. This is a very slow recipe to make ECH, or epichlorohydrin. But note the ratio here is 1 to 3 on the oleochemicals to glycerol. Oleochemicals gives you half. Well, a little over half. You have a, what is this? 3 to 2 ratio here? 3 to 2 is your ratio. Oleochemicals to glycerol, and then this is 1 to 3. So yeah, it's not designed to use the oleochemical recipe and get everything that you need for this. It would be nice if this was the identical ratio of 3 to 2 on oleochemicals and glycerol to feed into ECH, but if this is based off of a real life process that uses more glycerol, then you can't really change it if you want to maintain consistency. But with like real life processes, it's just off. It's just weird that it's off like that. It would be nice to just use the full output of your oleochemicals and not have to worry about backups or anything like that if it was perfect between the two. But you can make it perfect between the two. However, it becomes immediately not perfect the moment you put productivity modules in anyway on the production of the oleochemicals. So yeah, if the ratio is the same, it should be fine. Though you may have excess of both, or you may be short on both. But as long as the ratio is the same, you should never be backed up on one or the other. So my suggestion, of course, is, make the ratio the same on the oleochemicals as the output or the input on the ECH. But anyway, moving on. Formaldehyde, we've talked about before. We've discussed. You can do Tholen-based formaldehyde now, actually. So maybe do that. So that's epoxy. Epoxy is very common in this entire chain. The other thing that is very common in this chain is going to be graphene rolls. I was tempted to do a video specifically for graphene rolls because it actually gets used quite a fair bit in lots of things. Lots of things will use graphene rolls, but we're just going to go down this chain. It's very linear of a chain. I shouldn't make a single video on it. It would be done within 5-6 minutes ish. So phosphoric acid, graphene sheets, and biofilm. If you've been doing your blue science ore processing chains, you should know biofilm by now. If you've watched my videos on the ore processing chains, you know how to get biofilm by now. Graphene sheets, and you know how to get the phosphoric acid. Graphene sheets is boric acid, copper, and PDMS graphene base. PDMS graphene base is etching solution, sulfuric acid, PDMS, and Nick cores. And I'm realizing I don't think I made a building for the Nick cores. I forget what building it is. Clearly, it's not you. Is it a high pressure furnace? It is a GPU. Okay. GPU the next for the Nick core. So Nick cores and PDMS are what we need here. The Nick cores, or nickel cores, these are going to be pure sand, nickel plates, methane, and hydrogen. So there's your base materials. These are all base materials. These are mostly free. Like these are water. Water. PDMS, very, very low output. Bear that in mind. Hydrogen chloride. There's going to be a lot of hydrogen chloride in Circuit 3 chain. Just FYI, you're gonna spend a lot of hydrogen chloride. You're also going to spend a lot of liquid nitrogen as well. So keep these things in mind. Lots of liquid nitrogen and lots of hydrogen chloride, and a bit of etching solution as well. As you could see here, etching solution. We've talked about etching solution from Circuit 2's. Dimethyl dichlorosilane. Dimethyl dichlorosilane. This stuff is silicon, therefore silane. Silicon with grade 4 copper and chloromethane. Grade 4 copper. Yes, that's right. You are actually going to be needing to make grade 4 copper. If you certainly have done so by now. That's green science level of copper ore processing. Late stage, granted. This grade 4 copper is the one is like the step that leads into molten. At green science, anyway. There is recipe molten. Your first molten is G4 copper, so yeah. This effectively means it's quite a lot of copper plates-ish, but you're never going to be without copper. So it's fine. Like, the overall usage of copper in Pyanodons mods in relation to most other things is relatively reasonable. I will not say that it's low. It is not low per se, but it is lower than other things, such that even if you're still doing the green science processing, you're still going to have enough copper to feed your whole base. And there's enough means of getting copper ore that involve not mining it that you'll have plenty. Like, you don't have to worry about copper at all. Now, chloromethane is methanol and hydrogen chloride. So that's your... I'll consider these base materials because we've covered both of these in the past several times. So hydrogen chloride and methanol to make your chloromethane, added with copper and silicon, G4 copper and silicon, to give you the dimethyl dichlorosilane. And this, when added with even more hydrogen chloride, is going to give you your PDMS, or your polydimethyl siloxane. Polydimethyl siloxane. You really do start to feel like a chemist, even if you aren't. Just by playing these mods, you will feel like a chemist. So that will be your PDMS, and that is going to lead into here, and there you go. That is your graphene rolls. That is the graphene rolls right there. Just this and this. These right there. We good? I think we're good. Those will be base materials. The other, like, base material will be Heavy P-dope silicon, it only really gets used like once for processor cores. So let's talk about processors first, I guess. So your heavy P-dope silicon requires cold clean air. Everything else we've seen before, it's this cold clean air that's new. Cold clean air, which this is not enough of a difference between these two icons. I'm actually able to see there is a very slight difference between these two icons. So cold clean air comes from cold air and biofilm. It is filtered. It gives you a little bit of petroleum as well from this. You need to add liquid nitrogen to purified air to get cold air. Note that this is a 1-to-1 on the liquid nitrogen to nitrogen. So once you've fed in the nitrogen, this will loop. All you spend here is gasoline to convert your nitrogen to liquid nitrogen. That's all you really need to do here. This is an expenditure of gasoline. This used to take productivity, but it no longer does because, well, you would end up making extra nitrogen out of this, and yeah, not good. So that was removed. But it is still 1-to-1, or 1 to 10 to 1 to feedback. So once you have the nitrogen in and the system's moving, you'll never need to worry about adding any more nitrogen. You can cut it off completely. Alright. This is from purified air. Purified air will be activated carbon. Sadly, not filtration media to make it a little bit less on the zinc requirement there. And pressured air. So just air, basically, with activated carbon and biofilm to give you cold, clean air. Note, cold, clean air also has a recipe to make a little itty bitty tiny little bit of helium. You will, if you compress cold clean air with gasoline into liquid clean air, there is a recipe to make dry gas stream out of it in a DDC. It'll give you a little tiny itty bitty bit of helium for the liquid clean air that you throw at it. This is the introduction to helium. This is a means with which you are intended to start your initial production of helium to get enough superalloy to do something better for your production of helium, to actually use dry gas stream and better processes of making dry gas stream. And there are a few ways of doing this. You can do it out of stone/gravel, out of regolite, and out of petroleum gas as well. So, bearing all of that in mind, going forward, we now will have our heavy p-dope silicon. We use that, along with heavy N and light N doped silicon to make our processor cores. From there, our processors will require epoxy, graphene, processor cores, gold, aluminum plates, industrial solvent. You do remember just the industrial solvent from our diamond chain, right? We covered that in the diamond chain. Refer back to doing diamonds for the industrial solvent. This is where it gets used in circuit 3s as well. And it was used in purple science. We talked about it in purple science. It gets used again here. And vacuum. So congratulations, you have all of you have all of this now. So you have your processors. So processors done. We've talked about it. Processors are done. What next? What next? Let's do the mounted circuit substrate. Mounted circuit substrate is going to require printed circuit substrate 3, or PCB3. This is actually called PCB3-2. Interestingly enough, this is going to need batteries and optical fiber. You should have both of these. You should have batteries and optical fiber by now. So really, you're just making PCB3 and then taking two things that you already have and adding it to it to get your mounted. Now, this is going to need copper, fiberglass, nylon parts, tin, and MSA. Methane sulfonic acid. Or methanosulfonic acid. Now, the MSA and the fiberglass are new. Let's start with fiberglass. Fiberglass, we've got our epoxy again. We've also got glass fibers. Now, if you have been following with the special small parts, you already know about the glass fibers. You may have already set them up if you already have your special small parts. If you don't, this is when you'll set them up, and you will want to make sure that you have enough to use for your special small parts as well in that process. This will require fiberboard. Fiberboard we've used in Circuit 1s, like ever since Circuit 1s. Nylon was used Circuit 2s. Rayon is used for batteries. We've already set all that up. Boric acid, steam, and tar. So we have basically all of this. And just for reference, the glass fibers here. The boron trioxide, limestone, sand, clay, glass, sodium sulfate, and refined syngas. Quite a few things there for the glass fibers, but you're going to be using it here, and you're going to be using it again for special small parts right there, along with aerogel. MSA. MSA is going to require DMS, or dimethyl sulfide, hydrogen peroxide, and chlorine. Chlorine, of course, tholins for chlorine, and then we've discussed in detail hydrogen peroxide thus far. You'll note how you've seen how often that hydrogen peroxide has started to come up through the Circuit 2 chain. So yeah, just even more at this point. Now, DMS is from cadaveric aurum greenhouses. So this is bio-based. This is biology. Now, unfortunately, there is only one recipe for cadaveric aurum for your DMS in the current state of the game. This will very likely change with the release of Pi Alien Life. These guys will require sand, stone wool, fertilizer, coal gas, water, and acid gas. You can throw in the acid gas at this point if you really want to. Coal gas is free along with water. Really, the only thing here that we haven't necessarily seen before, I mean, I've discussed some stone wool in the past, but fertilizer would be the one thing. Like, this is the first required use of fertilizer to this point. You've been able to make it for quite some time if you haven't already made it. I had chosen to make it through the mixer recipe out of ammonium chloride, bones, urea, and ash, making use of bones from the production of collagen. Collagen production is going to end up with quite a bit of excess of bone and meat that you have to deal with, and this is a way to deal with the bones. It's also a way to deal with some of the blood if you are producing way more blood than you need for blood meal. So this is also a very useful recipe. Both of these methods of fertilizer are worth doing, I would say, because organic matter is free out of wood, out of logs, I should say. Ash is free, urea is completely free, and then blood and bones you're going to have plenty of excess from as you are producing collagen for the other parts in this chain, particularly for the epoxy, if you are doing that route for the epoxy. So yeah, that's how I would get the fertilizer here. So just note, either way, because you need bones here, you are going to need to do the initial setup that would eventually lead into collagen anyway. You're going to need to do Zapier processing anyway. so you may as well set up the collagen as well and make use of the skin from that processing. So there's your glorious DMS. I would, of course, suggest the gravel recipe for stone wool as a viable option due to how free gravel is. But it does use creosote rather than steam, which it can be considered to be a little bit more expensive of a fluid. The alternative is a stone and steam recipe, and you could spend a little bit of iron to make the stone for stone wool and just feed it some steam, and that would be probably the easier method of getting stone wool. I just wanted to do a recipe that gave me lots of gravel. It is a gravel and iron oxide and crushed quartz classifying recipe of sand. So since I was going to do that to get iron oxide basically and the crushed quartz, I was doing it for the iron oxide and the crushed quartz primarily. You decided, well, there's a lot of gravel produced out of this, so I may as well do the gravel stone wool recipe, and that has not ended well, logistically. Going back, I would probably just spend the iron. I may just switch over to doing the iron for that, but I am digressing now. So that is what you need for your MSA into your PCB3, into your PCB3-2, and then into your circuit boards. So that is the mounted circuit substrate done, and the fiberglass done. So all of this is done. We're good on those. Just like we are good on epoxy. This is more, me moving these is more for me than for you. Just keep, as a point of note here, this is just what we've covered thus far. This is what we've been covering thus far. We have talked about all of this. Can you believe it? We've already talked about all of this. All of this we've discussed thus far in about 33 minutes-ish. Moving on from here, we still have 4 more things to go. We have our resistor 3s, capacitor 3s, inductor 3s, and the SMD diodes to discuss. Let's start with those SMD diodes. These are going to require plastic. The vanilla plastic recipe is technically the best recipe for plastic. Out of all of the additional recipes for plastic that have been added, the vanilla recipe, well, traditionally the vanilla recipe has been the best. There has been a new recipe from melamine into plastic that I think needs to be looked at a bit more closely, because I think that might actually be the best plastic recipe. That could be a contender for the best plastic recipe out of melamine. So we shall see about that. But also epoxy, and then these diode cores. Diode cores. Oh boy, diode cores. Oh yes, I haven't set up this yet out here. Diode cores are going to require biofilm. Again, we've used the biofilm already in the cold, clean air. Nexalit, phosphate glass, rare earth tin alloy, and liquid nitrogen. Rare earth tin alloy. So rare earth tin alloy is going to require sand castings, rare earth oxides, tin, and heavy oil. We have all of this. We have all of this. So that is covered. Phosphate glass is iron oxide, phosphate rocks, crushed quartz, sodium sulfate, as well as some acetylene. You do not need a lot of phosphate glass in total in your entire base, so don't worry too much about not having a lot of this. Just make enough that you need at any given time. And this will actually produce, one machine of this will produce more than enough than you probably are really thinking about in terms of the scale of your initial setup anyway. So I mentioned this classifier recipe that gives you a lot of gravel and crushed quartz and iron oxide. Yeah, that's highly useful of a recipe. You may want to look into that to use for the phosphate glass to give you the iron oxide and crushed quartz for this. Otherwise, you just have to bring in your phosphate rocks from ancient remains, which, realistically speaking, that's going to be the only way that you get your phosphate rocks. Remember what I said about really hating collagen? Well, at Purple Science, which we're at now, technically, there is a recipe that gives you phosphate rocks, technically, fully biotically, without any sort of outside, like, non-renewable resource. You can technically get phosphate rocks renewably. However, it's 1-to-1 with collagen into phosphate rocks, which is way too expensive. Way too expensive, even for me, who is okay with building at really large scales. This scale is way too much considering how much phosphate we need, how many phosphate rock per second a full base would need anyway. So if you think about how many phosphate rocks per second a full base needs, offsetting the amount of phosphoric acid that this recipe also gives, which is very useful. It's very useful, but the amount of base phosphate rocks that you need, not even considered as phosphoric acid or phosphine gas, but just as phosphate rocks, is already rather obscene. And I mean, we're talking at the scale of like many multiple tens, hundreds scale of the actual rocks in a full-sized base at scale. And if you try to think, I built 10 collagen per second-ish on my stream save, and it was gargantuanly huge. I need way more than 10 per second phosphate rocks. So I'm not even remotely going to consider this as being viable because collagen's process and footprint is significantly too massive to be reliable and reliably used, unfortunately. Even though we do get access to that recipe because we will have access to the bioreactor at Purple Science. So that will be your diode cores for your SMD diodes. Note again, this is a use of additional liquid nitrogen here. Additional liquid nitrogen plus epoxy plus plastic. So that is done. Number the next. Let's talk about the inductor 3s. The inductor 3s, we've got our good friend epoxy, as well as gold and tinned cable, and then these high flux cores. High flux cores require niobium iron alloy, magnetic cores, graphene rolls, and more liquid nitrogen. Magnetic cores. Magnetic cores are going to require cladded cores, Kevlar, and superconducting coil. Cladded cores and Kevlar we made when making the optical fibers, so we will bring these in from our optical fiber chains. The superconducting coil will require plastic coil cores. I'm realizing I haven't placed a coil core building yet. Coil core. There we go. And the superconducting wire. The superconducting wire is going to require optical fiber, Nen-bit matrix, and tin plates, so we already have all of this. Remember, Nen-bit matrix required in the special small parts, as well as in Purple Science itself, production science packs. And then these coil cores are going to need copper and our good friend from Circuit 2's ferrite. It's not a lot of ferrite by comparison that you'll need for Circuit 3's as you needed for Circuit 2's, but it's still a non-zero amount, so you will need some ferrite here as well. And that is as basic as we're going to get here, going into our high flux cores and therefore into our inductor 3s. So there's your inductor 3s, all of this nonsense. Noticing a pattern here in what we've got left? So, resistor 3s, nichrome, epoxy, phosphate glass, nickel, and vacuum. We now already have all of this. We already have the phosphate glass, we already have the epoxy, it's done and dusted. And that just leaves us with capacitor 3s. Capacitor 3s need a core, a termination, and vacuum. The core will require copper coating. Hey, there's that optical fiber chain again. Boron carbide, which is very easy to make. It's just converting boron trioxide, or the heck it's called, the one from Green Science. It just add coke, basically, to get boron carbide. Ceramics, which we've seen since Circuit 1s. We've seen those since Circuit 1s. I'm actually looking for... Where's my HPFs, man? Where's my high pressure furnace? You make boron carbide. It is boron trioxide plus coke. Gives you carbide. Yeah, it's very simple. Very simple for that. Now, the termination will require nickel plates, silver plates, tin, and liquid nitrogen. We've seen all of this before, so we therefore have seen literally all of these things. And that, as they say, is that. That's it. That's Circuit 3s. That is everything that you need for your Circuit 3s. Most everything can use productivity. This one does not, because reasons. Pulp mills apparently cannot take productivity modules currently. Cough, cough. Pyanodon. Pulp mills, Mark IIs, apparently cannot take productivity. So, yeah, just as point of reference here, nor can nano assemblers. Apparently nano assemblers are also not able to take productivity. Ahem. Cough, cough. Don't think that's intentional. This recipe cannot. These filters cannot. Yeah, nano assemblers cannot. Why did infinity mode give me infinity? Thank you. Give me the infinites. So yeah, like, expect productivity to be available through most everything in this chain. Plan the building counts for your intended output accordingly, is what I would say there. So one chip shooter machine with 2 level 1 productivity module 1s will give you 0.76 on its output versus 1. If you use level 2s, which you'll be able to make afterwards, you get 0.78. 0.78 versus 6. Yeah, it's not much, but it will get better over time as you are able to start increasing mark levels and get additional module slots and get better modules once you get to your intelligent units, aka your Circuit 4s. So that would be that done and dusted, and that, as they say, is that. With that, folks, I would like to thank you all for watching. This has been Otaku's Showboat. Our next tutorial, I think, will absolutely be helium into super alloy, because that's going to be the next major item that we need. The one that's been notably missing thus far. We've already talked about special small parts, so the next logical step at this point, since we already will have super steel to make the special small parts, since we already have all of that, the next major thing to talk about is super alloy. And if I'm going to talk about super alloy, I may as well also take the time to discuss the helium, because the only complexity of super alloy is helium. Like, if you have everything else, you have super alloy, for the exception of helium. So we'll talk about helium. We'll cover my recommendations of your initial setup for making helium, and then what that means going forward. Of course, I'm going to assume that you're at Purple Science for this setup. I've got a blueprint that I will have down that we will discuss and talk about and all of that good stuff. But from here on out, I think we're only going to be doing one of these tutorials per week. There's really not that many tutorials left. Just for reference, we've almost, like, completed Pyanodons mods. Like, can you believe it? We've almost, like, fully completed this set of mods. In terms of the tutorials for required stuff, mostly required stuff. There's still some processes that I have not covered that are optional processes. I'm talking specifically about things like raw coal processing and the sands, the oil sands processing, uh, things of that nature. We haven't really talked about regolites yet. I will, when I talk about helium, discuss some about regolites. We haven't talked about uranium yet. We'll talk about uranium and uranium processing in a future video. That is guaranteed. We will talk about uranium because that is part of our required process going forward. But I do need to make that list of tutorials that we need to do and formulate an order with which to do them. So during this time going forward, and basically until we hit utility science, expect the tutorials to go down to one per week. So super alloy will be next. That will be next week. And that will be then followed by whatever I decide is necessary to be next as we work our way into... It's probably going to start by working our way into Mark III buildings and then into utility science, or first comes circuit 4s, then comes utility science, I think. Intelligent units are required directly for utility science, yeah. So, yes, we will do circuit 4s before utility science. Or at the very least, we'll talk about utility science when we talk about circuit 4s, something along the lines of the circuit 2 stuff, because I think it's possible that by the time you have the intelligent units, you'll have everything else, or you'll be close to having everything else. Definitely. So, going forward, the way that this is balanced is that if you start making stuff for Mark III buildings, by the time you've made all of the stuff for the Mark III buildings, you will be ready for intelligent unit. You will have what you need for your intelligent units and your utility science. That's how the intended balance is going forward. So I will, of course, talk about biopolymer. That's a big one going forward. We have to talk about each of these individual components separately, pretty much. A lot of these individual components need to be discussed separately. So I have to just go through each of these things on the utility science as well, decide which ones of these need their own videos associated with them, and which can be combined into something broader. So I have to take some time to decide that. So next week is going to be super alloy, and from there I'll keep you posted with that. Again, thank you all for watching. This has been Otaku Showboat. If you have enjoyed today's video, please be sure to comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to help make this series appear higher up in search results. You can do all of the social stuff through the links in the description below. You can help support Pyanodon at patreon.com/Pyanodon and myself at patreon.com/Otaku Showboat. And I hope to see you all next time.